Welcome to my third and final video about the disappearance of Leanne Goodall 46 years ago on the 30th of December 1978. Okay, so in this final video I will try to summarize what I see as the most relevant bits of information from the first two videos, and I'll also discuss my thoughts and opinions regarding Leanne and her disappearance. But before I do that, I will emphasize that a lot of this information has been based on reports I have acquired from the media over the years back then and now, and it is likely that there would be some errors in those reports. But I have tried to take this into account, especially where there are discrepancies between those reports. Okay, so I will start with some of the background information about Leanne's family. This may or may not be particularly relevant, but it could give some insight into the influences on Leanne's life growing up and how that may have affected her personality and behavioural traits. But anyway, Leanne's parents were married in 1949 in Sydney. They had 4 children, all boys, before Leanne was born on the 21st of March 1958. At about that time, it seems Leanne's family were living in a suburb of Brisbane, and her father was a soldier, and I assume it was most likely that he was based at the Gallipoli Army Barracks, as they lived in the suburb next to that. Now, Leanne's sister, Pam or Pamela, was born 19 months after Leanne was born. And by 1963, it appears the family was living in the Wyong area. And then by 1968, it seems their parents' marriage would have ended by then. The reported reason for the marriage ending was given in a newspaper interview with their mother, Beth. And the report says that she said it was because Leanne's father had a lot of gambling and womanizing issues, which that is her version. I don't know if it's true or not, but that is the reason given. And it seems Leanne's father wasn't really in the picture after she was about 10, or after the marriage broke up anyway. Okay, I also found out that Leanne's father was living in the living at Bondi in the 1970s, and was employed as a technician, which is what was described in the electoral roll. So that could mean a variety of things. He died at Wollongong in 2008 at the age of 80. Now, Warren, Leanne's oldest brother, he was reported as saying that he took on the father role for his younger siblings when he was 11, which, going by ages, seems to be a little bit of a contradiction, because we're told Leanne was nearly 10 when the marriage broke up, and if he took on the father role at 11 and he was the oldest of 4 older brothers, that would tend to indicate that he took on the role sometime before the marriage ended completely. Anyway, next I found out Beth remarried in 1971, and this marriage appears to have only lasted a few years, as it's reported that in 1976 she met Dan Lean, who she married, and they moved to Belmont. Beth remained married to Dan until her death in 2012, when she was aged 85. and Dan died 2 years later in 2014 at the age of 90. Leanne, by 1977, was living in Cromer in Sydney's northern suburbs. So she would have been 18, 19 at the time. But it seems that sometime in the 12 months before her disappearance, or 12 months or so before her disappearance at the end of 1978, she did move back to Newcastle. And she was sharing a flat with her second eldest brother, Malcolm, at North Lambton. So, yeah, I'll now move on to the events during the week leading up to her disappearance. Leanne and her family spent Christmas Day 1978 at her mother's sister's home at Marylands in Sydney. Leanne originally planned to stay in Sydney after those celebrations and spend a few weeks visiting with friends there. But on Boxing Day, she actually decided to travel to Muswellbrook with her brother Warren and his girlfriend and spend a few days there before then immediately going back to Sydney to spend those few weeks with friends. Accounts then differ as to whether her mother knew she was going to Muswellbrook. I suspect, or you would expect that she did know that, but either way, she wouldn't have been expecting to see Leanne for several weeks because it was known she was going to spend a few weeks in Sydney either way. Then on the 30th of December, sometime after 1 p.m, Warren dropped Leanne off at Muswellbrook railway station to catch the 1:52 p.m. train to Newcastle. Now, I located a timetable for the trains at that time, and it says the train was due to arrive there at 1:50 and depart at 1:52 and would get to Broadmeadow at 3:30. Anyway, I'll move on. She told Warren she intended to spend the night at their mother's home in Belmont. Then, the next day, she would travel to Cromer in Sydney to attend a New Year's Eve party and then spend a few weeks after that and remain in Sydney for a few weeks, spending time with friends. So, what happened after Leanne was dropped off by Warren is unclear. So, we've got a solid bit of information up to that point, and then there's various things that could have happened. And as Leanne's sister Pam said in a July 2024 NBN television news report,
whether she even actually got on a train at Muswellbrook, everything's doubtful because the police never even investigated anything. They never did a thing.
Anyway, it does seem unlikely to me that anything untoward would have prevented Leanne from boarding the train and catching it to wherever she ended up getting off. Because 1 p.m. in the afternoon, there'd be a lot of people around, you wouldn't think anything odd would have happened. 25th of September 2010, the Daily Telegraph article said it was a Sydney train that left Muswellbrook at 1:52 p.m. on December 30. At 3:30 p.m, Leanne got off the train at Broadmeadow. And those are the times that the timetable said. So trains can be late or early, so I wouldn't guarantee those times. So this was a Sydney-bound train, and it is possible that after speaking to Warren and telling him that she was going to spend the night at her mother's at Belmont, she might have changed her mind and just stayed on the train and went to Sydney. That is a possibility. Okay, now the Sydney trains don't actually go all the way into Newcastle Station. They divert from Waratah and go to Broadmeadow, so they wouldn't go through Hamilton or Wickham or Civic. So if that is the case, and we assume she got off at Broadmeadow and was intending to go to her mother's place at Belmont, she would have needed to get off there and catch a bus to Belmont. However, in October 1997, so that's nearly 19 years after she disappeared, an old school friend recalled seeing Leanne near the Star Hotel at 4 p.m. on the day she disappeared. You'd think after such a long time, remembering the exact time would seem a little unusual to recall that, but you never know. This was considered strong evidence by police at the time, but doubts exist about it now. So if she got off the train at Broadmeadow to go to the Star Hotel, she would have needed to catch another train to either Wickham or Civic Station, or even get a bus, which is in the opposite direction to Belmont. Alternative, it is possible she got off at Maitland Station and caught another train to Wickham or Civic. It seems more likely she would have got off at Broadmeadow. Or perhaps she did get off at Broadmeadow and then went to catch the bus to Belmont, but found she just missed a bus. And my memory from the time is the time between buses that would have gone out to Belmont is about an hour. So if she just missed one, would have been another hour wait. So perhaps she decided instead of hanging around at the bus stop for an hour, she might have thought she'd go into town and pop into the bar at the Star Hotel and stop there a little while before heading to her mother's place, because her mother didn't know she was coming and wouldn't have been expecting her there by any certain time. So if we then assume that she went to the Star Hotel and placed her bag behind the bar, as her friend who believes she saw her that day said that Leanne was intending to do, it is thought she could have stayed there at the Star Hotel, or possibly gone to the Ambassador nightclub later, because she did work there, so she would have been familiar with staff and visitors there, so she might have thought, go there for a little while before spending a few weeks in Sydney. And I should also mention that the Ambassador was also a place of interest by Strike Force Fenwick, because there was a connection with a few of the disappearances that occurred. For example, it was the nightclub that Annie Tomanak and Joy Hodgins were headed to on about 6 months before Leanne disappeared. And it was also frequented by Debbie Ray Pritchard, who disappeared in 1982, but her murdered body, was found about 10 years later during roadworks at Fullerton Cove. But anyway, the bottom line is that Leanne could have disappeared in Muswellbrook, Maitland, Broadmeadow, the Newcastle City area, Belmont, somewhere in Sydney, or anywhere in between those locations, or anywhere else. as it seems. Anyway, in other words, because of those lack of initial inquiries by police and probably to some degree the delay in them being notified, but it seems whether they were notified or not, they wouldn't have taken it seriously, and it just seems impossible now, or even the 19 years after when Strikeforce Fenwick started seriously looking into it, to know what actually happened and where or wherever she met with foul play or the misadventure that led to her disappearance. And there's actually also evidence that she was a prolific hitchhiker, and it's likely that she wouldn't have hesitated in accepting a lift from a stranger if that was offered. So, for example, she went to the Star Hotel or even anywhere else and she was offered a lift to Belmont, she probably would have taken it. For example, Warren McCorriston, who's a current person of interest, if perhaps he'd offered her a lift, she might have got talking to him, might have run into him at the Star or the Ambassador, or who knows. With him living only 2 streets away from her mother, it would have seemed very convenient, and yeah, probably would have not hesitated at all in getting a lift from him, or even anyone else who might have offered her a lift, as I said. Now, there is a rather confounding little bit of information, and it relates to evidence given at the inquest by Wendy MacDonald, who was the person whose party Leanne was meant to be going to on New Year's Eve. And the Sydney Morning Herald on the 20th of June 2001 had reported she received a phone call from Goodall a few days after Christmas 1978, saying her bag and wallet were stolen and she could not attend Mrs. MacDonald's New Year's Eve party. Now, it would be good to know exactly what day Leanne rang her, or if the family or anyone else was aware of the theft. Because if no one else was aware of it, it would tend to indicate that the theft must have occurred some time she left, or after Warren dropped her at Muswellbrook railway station. And if she did speak to this friend at or near the Star Hotel, well, she said she had a bag with her, so obviously it wouldn't have been stolen then. Yes, so it does seem likely if she had a bag with her that, it must have been stolen sometime after that. That's assuming this Catherine Pearson had her dates and years correct. If it was stolen at Muswellbrook train station and she didn't get to the Star Hotel, perhaps she did try and hitchhike to Newcastle because she wouldn't have had any money. But I think that's unlikely, in part because the question would then arise, where'd she get the money from to make the phone call to Mrs. MacDonald? Because she probably would have had to use a public phone box, and being long distance, ringing STD, you'd have to keep putting coins in the phone. Unless someone at the train station or the train station let her use their phone, but I don't think so. Okay, so assuming It's true that this Catherine Pearson saw Leanne near the Star Hotel and that Leanne put her bag behind the bar. It could have been stolen from there, and then that messed up her plans to go to Sydney. And perhaps being known at the Star, they might have let her use the phone. Though why she would ring a friend and tell her she's not going and not ring anyone else does seem a little odd. But anyway, someone there may have also offered to give her a lift to Belmont, and she met with some misadventure that way. Alternatively, another thought that cropped into my mind, it could have been stolen from there. It messed up her plans to go to Sydney. And she'd actually already been abducted when she rang Wendy MacDonald. And because she was the only person expecting to see Leanne for at least a few weeks, and her abductor forced her to make that phone call. Or maybe a bag wasn't stolen at all and he got her to, or I'm assuming it's a him, well, it could even be, got her to ring the friend in Sydney to make up some story why she wouldn't be going there the next day. Possible. There's just so many different scenarios because there was no police investigation at the time or soon after to talk to any possible witnesses to go and check out. Well, they didn't know about the Star, so they probably wouldn't have asked at the Star, but who knows? This Catherine Pearson might have found out sooner and let them know. And people would have remembered, but if they're talking about years later, trying to remember that, people won't remember. Okay, finally, there were three possibilities. This is the final thing I'll cover before I give my summary of my thoughts and opinions. Finally, there were three possibilities when the family realised Leanne was missing and contacted police. These were the next day, which doesn't seem likely from all the other information that she'd planned to go to Sydney for several weeks. It could have been a week or two later. I suggested maybe the 7th of January, 1979. The final one was the 7th of February, 1979. Yes, I suggested she was meant to go back to or start her course, her art course, on the 12th of February, and I suggested maybe the newspaper that reported the 7th of February got that mixed up, and that it should have been the 7th of January that she was reported. Or the other suggestion I made was because police initially showed a lack of interest, maybe they didn't record the report until the 7th of February. But anyway, I feel that it was most likely about 2 weeks after she went missing that the family realised and contacted police. So anyway, to summarise my thoughts on all this and what I think most likely happened, though I wouldn't put a lot of a strong feeling about that, particularly after Warren had dropped her off. So we have Leanne spent Christmas with family at Merrylands in Sydney. The next day, being Boxing Day, she decided to travel to Muswellbrook with her brother, even though her original plans were to stay a few weeks in Sydney. So that was with his brother and with her brother and his girlfriend. She was intending to spend a few days there and then head back to Sydney. So I've got the family believed she would spend a few weeks in Sydney visiting friends. And then when she went to Muswellbrook, it was delayed a few days. Warren has dropped Leanne at Muswellbrook station sometime after 1 p.m, because one report said 1 p.m, another 1:15. Assume it was sometime after 1 because the train was due to leave there by 1:52. So you'd imagine it would have been before then to give enough time in case the train was early, though they're rarely early. So as far as Warren was concerned, she was going to catch the train to Broadmeadow, and she told him that she was going to go spend the night at her mother's rather than going directly to Sydney. Okay, so that was the plan she told Warren. And it seems Warren was the only one who knew that Leanne was going to her mother's before Sydney. Definitely her mother didn't know. So what happened after Warren dropped her at Muswellbrook station? I suspect she probably did catch the train to Broadmeadow, though I think going direct to Sydney could be a possibility. And it's possible she did go to the Star Hotel for whatever reason, whether it was just on a whim or had to wait an hour for the next bus to go to Belmont. And at the Star Hotel, if she went there, she put a bag behind the bar and it most probably went missing from there. So she messed up her plans to go to Sydney, so she's contacted her friend in Sydney to say she wouldn't be going and probably still planned to go to her mother's. So maybe she accepted a lift, or as I suggested, she might have accepted a lift from someone who had bad intentions. She met with foul play. Maybe she rang this friend in Sydney. The bag mightn't have really been stolen, but I tend to think if she went to the Star, it was probably stolen from there, since her friend indicated she was going to put it behind the bar. The bag seemed to be a big issue. Okay, so in either way, she has met with some foul play or misadventure, but I think it's most likely the foul play option. Now, the family didn't suspect she was missing until probably about 2 weeks later, because, as I said, Warren was the only one who seemed to know she intended going to her mother's. He obviously hadn't spoken to his mother for a couple of weeks, went to visit her, and raised the point that Leanne was going to spend the night there. Mother said no, she didn't. So they contacted friends in Sydney and no one had seen her. So they then immediately notified police, who took no action, considered her a runaway and kept telling her for months, she'll be back. Made a few cursory calls to check whether she'd come back, but not anything beyond that. So ultimately, it's highly open to what happened to Leanne after Warren dropped her off. I think there's a reasonable possibility that her friend from school probably did see her near the Star Hotel, as long as the information she gave is accurate. But she could have been just trying too hard to remember, and the mind can create, forcing yourself to remember something can make yourself convince yourself that something is real when maybe it's not. Okay, so but anyway, I also have the impression from what I've read that, as Leanne's mother has said, she was a free spirit, and she would travel and visit and get about everywhere, there and everywhere. And perhaps she was the sort of person, if she did have plans, it was not unusual that she could change her mind about what they were on a whim, and at a moment's notice go and do something else. So there were a couple of examples during that week from when she disappeared, before she disappeared, because when she went to Sydney to spend time with family at Marylands, she had planned to just stay there for a few weeks and visit the friends. But then decided on Boxing Day she'd go to Muswellbrook with her brother and his girlfriend for a few days, and then immediately head back to Sydney and spend a few weeks there. And then, when Warren has dropped her at Muswellbrook Station, or maybe she said it before, but anyway, she'd decided she was going to spend the night at her mother's first, at Belmont, and then on the next day, on New Year's Eve, travel down that day. So have a good night's rest, I assume, and then head down to Sydney. So that's two examples of her changing her mind, and yeah. But anyway, so it is possible that she could have even changed her plans again after speaking to Warren and decided not to spend the night at her mother's, and it's not beyond the realms of possibility that she either went straight to Sydney or went to the Star Hotel or something completely different. But I'll leave it there, and if you do have any thoughts on any of this, I think particularly that phone call to Sydney about a bag being stolen, because something, I don't know, it just doesn't make much sense to me. Yeah, but I kind of believe she did make the phone call to the friend, but it's not mentioned anywhere else the bag was stolen. It's just something doesn't seem quite right with that. But anyway, you got any thoughts on that or anything else about her disappearance? Be happy for you to put it in the comments. If you didn't want to make it public, you can contact me directly. I put some details at the end of my description how to do that. And also remember, if you do have any information that you think it's possible the police don't already have, I suggest you contact Crimestoppers on 1800 333 000, or you can make a report on their website as well. Anyway, I hope you found this video interesting and informative, along with the other two as well. And if you'd like to see my future videos, please subscribe and click on the bell to be notified when I upload them. And if you'd like to support me to make more videos, you can do so at Patreon. I'm David A. Elliott. Have a good one, and see you around like a risol.